So the final place that I served in was it's called Alaverdi, and it's this tiny city. It's the northernmost area in Armenia, and it had been a branch for a few years, and then there were just some issues in the branch, and they closed down the branch. They took out the missionaries, closed down the branch, and so then the members there had to go to Vanadzor, the closest place, which was about an hour away. And so they couldn't really afford doing that every Sunday, you know. So the branch kind of just dissolved. And then me and my companion, we reopened the area, and it was so great. It was just such a fun time, you know. A lot of reactivation, a lot of finding like the 30 members basically that were originally part of the branch. And I left right after that, but I've heard that it's booming now. You know, they put another companionship in the area, which is huge. Their attendance has gone up quite a bit. They've gotten a lot of baptisms there. So it was definitely, the Lord had definitely prepared the area to be reopened. As far as the city itself, it's a really interesting city. It's like in the middle of the mountains, kind of. It's like the most beautiful area I've seen, especially in spring and summer. But it's in the middle of the mountains, just like in this tiny valley, basically. And there's a river that goes through the city, and right alongside the river, there's a train that goes through the city up to Georgia. And so there's like two parts of the city. It's kind of divided into two. There's the part in the valley along the river, and then there's this part on top of like a plateau, kind of above that. And the way that they connect the two cities is this like lift, basically. There's a lift, kind of like a ski lift, basically, that connects the bottom part of the city to the top part of the city. And right when I got there, a lightning bolt hit the lift and it stopped working. So I have never ridden the lift, and I don't know if they've gotten it to work again, but that's kind of like the main method of transportation between the two areas. I mean, that's probably one of the poorest areas I've ever seen in Armenia. It's very, very poor. Very humble conditions, but, you know, in that aspect, also very humble people. Really laid back and always, you know, willing to talk to you. And yeah, that was a really special area. But
the government there just likes to create their own holidays. So sometimes, like, you have no idea a holiday's coming, and then suddenly there's a holiday. You're like, sweet, no one's at work. This is great. So that's one thing that was really fun. In July, this is my favorite. They have a water day. And basically it gives you permission to throw water on whoever you want to throw water on, whether they're old or whether they're young, like, and you just see little kids running around with buckets of water. And in the city especially, they have water fountains all over, and so they'll just take the buckets and fill them up and just get everyone. So that's a lot of fun. That's something I looked forward to. See, Christmas there's not very big. They actually celebrate Christmas January 6th. And so I think it kind of gets lost in the New Year's celebrations. But New Year's is big. New Year's lasts all week long. And they set their table. They just like fill it with food. It's like this huge feast all week. And they invite their friends and they go to their friends' houses. And it's just a huge party all the time, no matter where you go. And everyone wants you to come to their house. And like the Armenians are the same way with their friends. They're like, you have to come to my house, I'll go to your house. And it's big, really big. And like fireworks all week long. Just, wow, big stuff. And then Easter. Easter's big there as well, probably because they're Christian, but it's much more simple than our Easter is. They're much more humble, I suppose. I'm not sure if they understand the implications of what Easter is and how it's that Christ was really resurrected, but they, on the streets, when they greet people, they say like, Christ is risen. They actually say that to each other as they greet each other on Easter. And then they dye eggs, but they dye them red to symbolize Christ's blood. And they grow, like a couple weeks in advance, they grow grass from wheat, and they use it as decorations. They like put the eggs inside of it and everything. And then they serve rice with raisins. It sounds really kind of interesting, but it's really good. Rice and raisins, they like fry them together, and then they also serve it with greens, with like parsley and cilantro and basil, and then their lavash, and that's like their Easter meal. Sorry, they have a lot of memorial days where they take things to their graves. Like they'll take, I don't even know how to explain it. What they do is they take a plate that's from the meal that they've eaten as a family, and they leave it there by the grave, both like giving it to their ancestor as well as leaving it for the poor. And then in April, in 1915, there was an Armenian genocide. The Ottoman Empire killed over 1 million Armenians because they were Christian. And so April 24th, they celebrate that. And in Yerevan, they have, they call it a peace monument. And they have like an eternal flame going all the time. And usually there is just like a single layer of flowers. When people go and visit, they like lay out carnations and tulips and stuff around the outside of it. And then on this one day, like millions of people go. Like as many people that have the chance to go, they go. And so by the end of the day, there's like over 6 feet tall of flowers just around this eternal flame. It's really neat. A neat experience.
Third city is called Ashtarak. That was a rough city. It's really small, and the Armenian Apostolic Church there is pretty strong. They have several churches there, so the feel of the people in that city are kind of different. And it's, as far as I know, the smallest branch in Armenia, as far as numbers. But the members there are really strong because there are so few that like they have no reason to go to church other than the fact that they know it's true. The members in that city, because they're so few, they are all just so strong. They're what's holding that branch together. And so that was a particularly tough area because we worked really hard, and I was there for about 6 months and didn't have any investigators really for 6 months. And I've heard that it's changed. I know that right after that they took the missionaries out of that city just because it was struggling so much, and I think they put them back, and it's been having a lot more success since then. But that was some of the most spiritual times of my mission, just because it was so difficult, and there was a lot of relying on the Lord. And the sacrament meetings there are so special because, there are not a lot of people coming to the sacrament meetings, not a lot of members, but they're all just so strong, so converted. And some of the testimony meetings that I had in that area were the strongest that I've had in my whole life. So that was a very special area. I think that's where I kind of began to really understand what a mission is all about.
I lived in Yerevan, specifically in center, this place called Kenteron, for 6 months, and it was definitely an interesting time. I'm more of a small city person myself, but it was a great experience to be able to live there. Yerevan's is broken into different districts, and so people are kind of segregated. They're not limited to these districts, but they kind of just identify themselves with these districts. So we lived in the district of Center, and there's a lot of public transportation and a lot of services for those districts. For instance, in Center there was a metro, so a lot of my public transportation for the day was done over the metro because we lived about 20 minutes away from the church, and so we just hopped on the metro and rode to the church. The center is probably one of the most developed parts of Armenia. It's heavily invested in by the Armenian government. Armenia, the Yerevan specifically, they've been trying to beautify it and trying to make it better just as an attraction to get more people to come in, and they're trying to show it off and be like, come to our country and look at this city, it's so nice, while the rest of Armenia doesn't quite get that same benefit. But so specifically in center where I was living, they've made huge renovations and huge malls and huge there's this, at one point there's this huge street, and it's one of the richest streets in Armenia, and we had that in my mission. And so that there was huge department stores like Armani, all these like brand names that was just like really expensive, that only the very rich could afford. It was kind of interesting because I also had one of the poorest areas in my mission, in the same district, and so I had served in both of those. Admittedly, I did more work in the poor district, but it was an interesting contrast that in this part of the city they're investing so much in to make it look nice for tourists, versus the parts where people actually live, they kind of let it fall apart. And so, but the people there are still so kind. Sometimes the city is different at times, just because there's so many people and they're all so busy and they're stacked on top of one another. City life is different. People are, it's not that they're less friendly, but they are more of in a hurry. And so sometimes it can be harder to talk to people, but there's still so many wonderful people that we met. Even in the city, there's better chances for work. That was one of the primary concerns of people, is just the ability to get a job. People want to work. They want to be able to provide for their family, but there's so often where they can't be, where they just there's just not enough work for them. So there's a lot of men that are just working really tough manual labor jobs, and the women are working kind of back-breaking labor as well. And it's really sad to see, but it's better in Yerevan than it is in the rest of the country. So when I get to talk to people, there are a lot more jobs, and people do have opportunities for work. And so that does tend to help with when we're finding people that have jobs, that have families that are established, and they're able to sustain themselves. And those can be very strong members of the church. But for more public transport in Armenia, I loved these things called marshutnis, and what they are, they're just these vans, and they have these numbered routes, and then there's just hundreds, thousands of them going along these routes, so that when you want to go, you just like flag one of them down, and it costs about $0.25. You sit it as long as you want, and then you get off. And they have a very good public transportation system. And so we didn't have cars. Like I mentioned, Armenian traffic before, we would have died. But we were able to sit these marshutnis or take a taxi or somewhere to get to everywhere we needed to go. The city had a lot more not food specifically, but a lot more availability of everything than the outlying cities. So there was more food, there was more electronics, more of all of that stuff, more variety. Because they had a store, it was called Yerevan City. It was probably about a quarter to half the size of Walmart. Not super big, but by Armenian standards, it was huge. So they had a lot more of those large department stores and a large grocery stores for people to use. There's just a lot more business and a lot more activity going on in Yerevan than other places, and so it made it added an interesting dynamic to the missionary work, but it also added a lot of opportunities that we could take advantage of. And so overall, it was a very good experience living in Yerevan and being able to work there. And there's so many people there, and that's a lot of where our strongest members live. There's about let me count, there's about 4 wards there in Yerevan now. And there's 3 wards and 1 branch. The 1 branch is close to becoming a ward, but like I said, there's such incredible people there, and that was ultimately what made my experience in Yerevan great, was the people that I had a chance to work with. There's just a lot of special people there and a lot of opportunities to get missionary work done.